My brother stole my life savings, disappeared, and now he's returned with a fake identity, trying to legally marry my wife behind my back and seal my entire life. When I saw Lam, 33M, standing across the street from my house, I felt the shock hit like a punch to the gut. He was watching my home, my life, with an intensity that sent every nerve in my body into high alert. It had been over 2 years since he disappeared with my life savings, everything I'd been putting aside for a future, for my family. He'd vanished without a trace, leaving me in a financial pit that took months of hard work to claw my way out of. But here he was, standing across the street like he'd never left. Only now, he looked different. His normally messy blonde hair was cut neatly, he'd grown a beard, and he was dressed sharper than I'd ever seen him before. But there was something familiar in the way he carried himself, something no amount of disguises could mask. I knew him too well. He could change his appearance, but not the aura of someone with an agenda. What could he possibly want now? I thought, anger and disbelief swirling as I crossed the street to confront him. Liam! I called out, my voice sharp. He turned, but his expression didn't register the usual flicker of guilt. Instead, he looked at me like a stranger, almost bored. "Excuse me?" he said in a calm voice, his tone laced with polite indifference. My anger only grew. "Stop the act, Liam. Where have you been? Do you have any idea what you put me through?" He tilted his head slightly, his eyes cold. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said, his voice steady. "My name is Ethan, not Liam." "Cut the crap," I shot back, my voice low but firm. "I know exactly who you are. The only thing I don't know is why you're here." "Why now?" He narrowed his eyes, a hint of amusement flashing across his face. "You think I'm here to explain myself to you?" he asked, his tone mocking. "I have built my life up again, made something of myself. Maybe you should try the same." The audacity of his words nearly sent me over the edge, but I kept my cool, clenching my fists to avoid lashing out. "You stole from me everything, and now you're pretending like none of it ever happened." He smirked, crossing his arms. "Money's just money, Mike," he said, shrugging casually. "Besides, you never really valued what you had, not like I do." Hearing him say my name with that sneering indifference brought back every sleepless night, every moment I'd spent working extra hours to recoup the losses he'd inflicted. I'd been cautious around him even before the theft, always careful not to let him know too much, but never in a million years had I imagined he'd turn on me so thoroughly. My trust in him, my own brother, was gone. And now, he returned with a new identity and an attitude that made it clear he felt no remorse. I was about to demand he leave when I noticed his gaze shift from me to the house. My wife, Emily, 31F, had just stepped outside to pick up a package, and the moment he saw her, his expression changed. A strange look crossed his face, one I couldn't place but didn't like. I watched, horror creeping in, as he smiled softly, a disarming smile that once might fool me. "Who's that?" he asked, pretending he didn't know her. Quite a catch. The realization hit me like ice. He wasn't just here for me. He was here for Emily. I could feel my stomach churn as I pieced together the unsettling truth that he wasn't just back to taunt me. He had plans far worse than I'd imagined. "She's off limits, Liam," I said, my voice barely holding back the rage that had been simmering. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now." His smile grew wider, chillingly calm. "You seem awfully possessive, Mike. A woman like her deserves someone who can provide more than just a working man's life. Someone with resources, connections, the kind I have now." A wave of nausea washed over me. "What are you talking about? You haven't changed. You're the same person who stole from his own family, the same person who's willing to lie and manipulate to get what he wants." He shrugged, as though my words didn't touch him at all. "Believe what you want, but I've changed more than you know. Maybe she'll see that." "You're not going anywhere near her," I warned, my fists clenching. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with a look that felt almost clinical. "Who says she won't come to me first? People are drawn to power, Mike, and I have that now." His words slithered out like a poison, each one digging deeper. With one last, cool smile, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street. I watched until he was out of sight, heart pounding, my mind racing with questions. What was his plan? And how did he intend to get close to Emily? Later that evening, As I sat across from her at dinner, I found myself studying her, noting how much she'd been through with me in the past couple of years. I couldn't tell her about Liam yet. How could I possibly explain that my own brother, the man who nearly ruined us, was back? And with this twisted obsession, the last thing I wanted was to burden her with fear when I didn't fully understand his intentions. But I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark forever. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Liam's expression, the calculating look he'd given me when he'd seen Emily. The whole situation felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I lay there, wondering what he could be planning and how far he'd go to get what he wanted. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on him, tracking his movements as subtly as I could. He'd taken up residence in a swanky apartment downtown, living a lifestyle far beyond what he'd ever managed to pull off before. But it was his interactions that rattled me most. He'd started showing up in places I frequented, in restaurants I took Emily to, appearing just close enough to be noticed without making his intentions obvious. And to my horror, one evening, I caught sight of him talking to her casually, as if they were strangers meeting by chance. I watched from a distance, heart pounding, as he turned on the charm, making her laugh at some joke only they could hear. I felt rooted to the spot, torn between storming over and dragging him away and playing it cool to avoid alarming her. But as I watched, my blood ran cold. He was wearing a small wedding band, a band identical to the one I'd picked out for myself when Emily and I got engaged. I waited until he left, and then I approached Emily, trying to hide the urgency in my voice. "Hey, who was that guy you were talking to?" She smiled, not suspecting a thing. "Oh, just someone I ran into. He was nice, actually, a little odd. He kept asking me about my plans, things like that, but I just figured he was being friendly." A knot formed in my stomach, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Did he say anything else?" She looked at me, sensing my tension. "Just that he'd seen me around and wanted to introduce himself. He was polite." "Why?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Not yet, but I knew that Liam was planning something dangerous, something deeply personal. I had to protect her, to protect our life together, but I couldn't tell her the whole truth, not until I had more answers. I spent the next few days consulting anyone who could help. Friends, legal advisors, anyone who could give me an angle on how to confront someone who'd assumed a false identity. I wasn't sure what Liam's next move would be, but I was certain of one thing. He wouldn't stop until he'd taken everything from me. And I was going to do everything in my power to make sure that didn't happen. For the next few days, I was on high alert, my mind constantly racing with the thought of Liam's fake identity, his strange interactions with Emily, and the ominous feeling that he was setting up something much bigger than I realized. I couldn't shake the memory of him standing there with that wedding band on his hand, looking too much like me for comfort. I didn't know how he'd pulled it off, but he'd done it, built an entirely new identity, one close enough to my own to make anyone second guess what was real. I was careful not to let Emily notice my growing anxiety. Every time I saw her, I felt the need to warn her, to explain everything. But it was difficult. How could I tell her that my brother, a man she barely knew, had returned with plans to steal her right out from under me? Meanwhile, I kept tabs on him whenever I could, watching his every move. He spent a lot of time downtown, just a few blocks from where I worked, as if he were deliberately hovering within my orbit. And sure enough, one day as I left work, I caught sight of him, sitting confidently at a cafe across the street, sipping his coffee and watching me. I crossed the street and approached him, keeping my tone controlled as I sat across from him. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Liam?" I demanded. His eyes sparkled with a cold amusement as he glanced up from his coffee. "Isn't it obvious, Ethan?" he replied, smirking. "I'm enjoying my life, something you seem incapable of doing, from what I can tell." "You mean my life," I corrected, barely keeping my voice down. "Whatever you're trying to pull here, it ends now." He raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "No, why would I do that? I've only just started. You know, it's amazing what a little rebranding can do. New name, new connections, a whole new image. You'd be surprised how many doors open when you walk in as someone else." "You're not going to get away with this," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Whatever you think you're owed, this isn't the way to get it." He gave a low chuckle, leaning back in his chair. I'm not after some petty revenge, Mike. I'm here because I deserve what you have. Your life, your success. Her, he said, his voice dripping with menace as he glanced in the direction of my house. I thought you'd understand that by now. The rage simmered beneath the surface, but I knew better than to let him see how much he was getting to me. You're delusional if you think I'm going to let you come in and steal my life. Emily would never fall for this. You're wasting your time. Maybe she wouldn't, he replied, shrugging, but she might be convinced by Ethan. After all, it's hard to resist a man who knows everything she loves, every detail of what she wants. And it just so happens I'm quite the quick learner. The insinuation was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just aiming to disrupt my life, he wanted to replace me entirely. The anger nearly got the better of me, but I took a deep breath, focusing on what I needed to do to end this once and for all. Liam, whatever you're planning, know that it's only going to end one way, with you behind bars. I have evidence of what you've done, and I'm not afraid to go to the police. He chuckled, unfazed. Oh, you think a simple report will be enough to stop me? I've thought this through, Mike. This is my life now, not yours. I'm finally getting what I deserve. With that, he picked up his coffee, a smug smile plastered across his face, and walked away, leaving me sitting there, seething. I couldn't stand by any longer. I had to tell Emily the truth, no matter how wild or unsettling it sounded. She deserved to know, and I needed her to be prepared for whatever came next. That evening, I went home early, catching Emily as she was tidying up after dinner. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Emily, there's something I need to tell you about my brother. I started, my tone serious. She looked at me, her brow furrowing in concern. Your brother? I thought wasn't he gone? He was, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. But he's back, and he's not the same person he used to be. He's using a new identity, Ethan, he calls himself, and he's been watching us. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. Watching us? Mike, this sounds insane. Are you sure? I nodded, taking her hands in mine. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. He stole from me, my life savings, and now he's come back with this fake identity, pretending to be someone else. And I think he's planning something dangerous. Emily's hand tightened around mine, her face filled with disbelief and worry. But why? What does he want? He wants everything, Emily, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. He wants my life. He wants to replace me. And I think he wants you too. She pulled her hands away, looking at me in horror. Mike, that's insane. I barely even know him. And you're saying he's pretending to be you? Not exactly, I said, frustrated. But he's spent months watching us, studying my life. He knows exactly how to act, what to say. He thinks he can step into my shoes and make everyone believe it. Emily looked at me, her eyes a mix of fear and disbelief. Mike, what are we supposed to do? I mean, how do we stop him? We go to the police, I said firmly. I have evidence of the money he took, and we can report that he's been stalking us. They'll help us figure out how to handle this. But even as I said it, I felt a hollow doubt settled in my chest. Liam had gone to great lengths to build his new identity. He likely covered his tracks carefully. And as I watched Emily's face shift from fear to worry, I knew she was beginning to doubt me too. It was exactly what he wanted, to make me look paranoid, unhinged, and insecure. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on gathering as much information as I could about Liam's new life. I spent hours going through any records I could find, calling in favors from friends who might know where he'd been, but it was like chasing a ghost. He'd thought of everything, covering his tracks so thoroughly that even his digital footprint was almost impossible to trace. Then, one evening, I returned home from work to find Emily sitting on the couch, her face pale, a strange look in her eyes. She was holding a small white envelope, and as I came closer, she handed it to me silently. I opened it, reading the letter inside, my heart pounding as I took in each word. Dear Emily, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to formally introduce myself, as I know we've only met briefly. I am Ethan, a close acquaintance of Mike's, and I wanted you to know that I'm here to support you in whatever way you need. If you ever find yourself in need of someone who truly understands, Please know I'm only a call away. Warm regards, Ethan. The implications hit me like a brick. Liam wasn't just targeting me anymore. He was working his way directly into Emily's life, pretending to be some caring friend who could help her in ways he believed I couldn't. He was trying to undermine our relationship from the inside, sowing seeds of doubt to weaken her trust in me. Emily looked up at me, her expression conflicted. Mike, why would he do this? Why go to these lengths just to mess with us? Because he's obsessed, Emily, I said, my voice tight. This isn't about logic for him. It's about control. He wants what I have, and he thinks that by making you question me, he can take it. She shook her head slowly, fear and confusion clouding her expression. Mike, this is terrifying. But are you sure he's not just trying to get a reaction out of you? What if confronting him makes things worse? I took her hands, holding them firmly. I know it's hard to believe, but he's not going to stop until he has everything he wants. We have to act. We have to fight this together. Her grip tightened, and she gave a slow nod, her resolve matching mine. Then let's fight him. We'll do whatever it takes. As I held her close, the enormity of the battle ahead became clear. Liam was calculating, ruthless, and he had nothing to lose. But neither did I, not when it came to protecting the life and love I'd fought so hard to build. I'd lost everything to him once, but I'd be damned if I'd let him steal the rest. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation and planning. I knew that confronting Liam wouldn't be easy, especially with him using this fake identity so convincingly. If he was bold enough to openly write Emily letters and insinuate himself into her life, he wouldn't back down without a fight. But I had one thing he didn't, the determination to protect what was mine. I filed a formal report with the police, bringing every piece of evidence I had of Liam's past crimes and identity theft. I laid it all out for them, the life savings he'd taken, the trail of fraud he'd left behind. The officers listened carefully, taking notes, but when I mentioned his new identity, their interest waned slightly. One officer, Detective Sarah Connolly, 40F, leaned forward, her expression doubtful but open. So, just to clarify, she said, flipping through her notes, you're saying he's returned under a different identity and is actively trying to impersonate you or take over your life? Exactly, I replied, frustration simmering just below the surface. He's been using a fake name, dressing like me, going out of his way to learn every detail of my life. He's even been writing letters to my wife, pretending to be someone else. This isn't just random harassment, it's calculated. Detective Connolly nodded slowly, still assessing the situation. And you said he's made direct contact with your wife, insinuating himself into her life as Ethan, I clarified, the name tasting bitter as I spoke it. A fake name he's been using to try and get close to her, to manipulate her into dubbing me. He's trying to rewrite my life with him at the center. The detective's gaze sharpened slightly, and she jotted down more notes. It sounds complicated, and we'll certainly look into it, she said finally. Identity theft is serious, and we'll be able to pursue this as fraud if we can establish that he's using a false identity. But you'll need more concrete evidence, witnesses, digital proof, anything that connects him directly to this Ethan identity. The words stung, but I nodded, trying not to let frustration cloud my focus. The police could help, but they weren't going to swoop in and handle everything. This was on me to prove. After that meeting, I returned home feeling both exhausted and more resolved than ever. I spent hours each night going over every record, every photo and file I had on Liam, trying to find a thread I could pull. Meanwhile, Emily did her best to carry on with our daily life, but the tension was undeniable. Every time we went out, I could feel her scanning the crowd, looking for any sign of Liam. He'd invaded her sense of security, and I hated him for that more than anything. One evening, as I was sorting through my files, I got a call from an old friend, Jason, 34 of him, someone who knew Liam and me back in high school. Jason had moved across the country a few years back, but he still kept in touch from time to time. He sounded concerned, his voice tense. Mike, I need to tell you something strange, he started without any small talk. I just got a call from some guy named Ethan, said he knew you and wanted to check in on your life, see how you were doing. He was fishing for information, like he was trying to piece together details about your work, your family. My heart raced as I realized Lime was widening his reach, contacting anyone who could fill in the gaps of his fake story. Jason, that's Lime. He's using a fake identity trying to get into my life. Whatever he said, don't believe it. He's after more than just information. Jason went silent for a moment, and I could almost hear him processing the absurdity of the situation. You're saying your own brother is trying to, what, become you? Something like that, I replied, the words heavy with anger. It's a long story, but he's not stopping. If he calls you again, please don't give him anything. Jason promised to stay quiet, and even offered to contact other mutual friends to warn them about Lime. It was a small relief, knowing that someone else was aware of what I was facing. But the larger threat still loomed. The next day, Emily came home from a quick run to the grocery store, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly as she placed a card down on the counter. My heart sank as I recognized Lime's handwriting, even through the casual script he was using as Ethan. Dear Emily, I enjoyed our last conversation. I feel like you understand me in ways few people do. I'd love to spend more time together, get to know you better, maybe have a private dinner. Just us. Your friend Ethan. I felt the blood drain from my face. He was pushing harder, seeing how close he could get to her, testing her limits, and mine. Mike, Emily said, her voice trembling. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. He's actually trying to. I mean, is he serious? I clenched my fists, struggling to stay calm. He's dead serious, Em. This is his way of tearing me apart piece by piece. He thinks if he can get close enough to you, he can rewrite the story, make you doubt me and believe he's the better option. But how? She asked, horrified. How could he think I'd ever fall for this? I barely know him, and he's using a different name. I mean, what's his endgame? He wants to replace me, I said, my voice low but steady. Liam thinks that if he can convince enough people, worm his way into your trust, he can erase me completely, like I never existed. She shook her head, visibly unsettled. This isn't just jealousy, is it? It's something more. It's an obsession, I replied, struggling to contain the anger that bubbled beneath the surface. An obsession with taking everything I have because he thinks he deserves it. We spent the rest of the evening planning our next steps, going over every detail, every potential move Liam might make. I knew he was close, but I didn't know how far he'd go. And as much as I hated to admit it, he was smart, cunning in a way that was impossible to predict. A few nights later, I decided to confront him directly once more. I waited outside his apartment, determined to finally catch him in the act and record his confession, something concrete I could bring to the police. When he finally emerged, I stepped into his path, forcing him to acknowledge me. Well, if it isn't my dear brother, he said with a smirk, looking unbothered. To what do I owe this pleasure? I want you to leave, I said, holding my phone discreetly at my side, recording everything. Leave me, leave Emily, leave the city. I know what you're doing, and it stops now. He laughed, the sound sharp and taunting. Oh, Mike, you're making this far more dramatic than it needs to be. I'm only here because you've proven incapable of handling the life you've been given. I'm simply stepping in. Is that why you're writing letters to my wife? Pretending to be someone you're not? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. His smirk only grew. Your wife? Are you sure about that? From what I've seen, Emily seems open to new possibilities. Maybe she needs someone who can give her more than you ever could. My blood boiled, but I kept my tone controlled. Emily isn't interested in you, Lam, or Ethan, or whatever you're calling yourself. She sees right through you. His smile faltered, but only for a second. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice dripping with contempt. I'm not going anywhere. I'm Ethan now, and I have every right to build the life I want. Maybe one day Emily will see that I'm the better choice. I could feel the rage bubbling up, but I forced myself to keep calm, knowing the recording was capturing every word. You'll never be me, Liam, no matter how much you pretend, no matter what you steal. You're nothing but a fraud, and soon everyone will know it. He shrugged, unfazed. We'll see about that. But I'd be careful if I were you. Wouldn't want anything to happen to that perfect life of yours. With that, he walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me standing there with a pit of anger and dread in my stomach. I knew this fight was far from over, but at least now I had something solid, something I could use to prove the extent of his madness. As I headed home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for my future with Emily, for the life we'd worked so hard to build. And I'd do whatever it took to make sure Liam could never touch it again. I spent the next few days compiling the evidence I'd gathered, including the recording of Liam's disturbing confession. But even with what I had, it wasn't enough to immediately take him down. Liam was smart. He'd been careful to avoid leaving any obvious legal holes I could exploit. The police, while concerned, said that without more concrete evidence of him using my identity directly, they couldn't act beyond the report I'd already filed. And yet, every day that passed, I felt him pressing in closer, slipping into every vulnerable space he could find. More letters appeared at the house, each one more unnerving than the last. In one, he included a small locket that looked eerily similar to the one I'd given Emily on our first anniversary. Another letter hinted at a dinner he'd had with someone special. The implication alone was enough to make me feel sick. He was sending these messages to drive a wedge between us, to make me look paranoid or possessive. Emily tried to remain strong, but I could see the toll it was taking. She jumped at small sounds, avoided going out alone, and even though she never said it, I could tell the letters were getting to her. She was caught between supporting me and feeling genuinely unsettled by Liam's escalating obsession. Then, one evening, I received a text from an unknown number. "Mike, it's Jason. Call me ASAP. It's about your brother." My heart raced as I dialed the number, and Jason picked up almost instantly. "Mike, I just got a call from Ethan," he began, sounding rattled. "Or Liam, I guess. He'd asked me to meet him at some bar downtown. He was acting like nothing was wrong, like he and I were old friends, just catching up." "What did he say?" I asked, my stomach twisting. He's completely delusional, Mike. He started talking about how he and Emily are meant to be together, how you're holding her back. He said he's going to show her who he really is, that it's only a matter of time before she realizes he's the better choice. Hearing it out loud was almost too much to bear, but it confirmed everything I'd feared. "Jason, did you record any of it? Anything I can use?" "No, but I'll try to get him on record next time," he promised, his tone firm. "He's so far gone, Mike. I don't know what he's planning, but he's convinced he can take over your life." That night, as I lay in bed, every worst-case scenario played through my mind. I'd never felt so powerless, so consumed by the feeling that Liam was about to make his final move. Emily was asleep beside me, and as I watched her breathing softly, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to protect her, to end this nightmare before Liam's delusions put her in harm's way. The next day, I left work early and went directly to Liam's apartment. I'd wrestled with this decision for days, knowing that confronting him alone was a risk. But it was a risk I was willing to take. I had to get through to him, to make him understand that he would never succeed, that his obsession was nothing but a dangerous fantasy. I waited outside his building until he arrived, watching as he strolled down the sidewalk, whistling softly to himself, looking more like me than ever in a dark jacket I could have sworn he'd borrowed from my closet years ago. The sight was chilling, my own brother wearing a version of my life like some twisted costume. "Liam," I called, stepping into his path. His eyes lit up, a smug smile spreading across his face as he recognized me. "Mike," he greeted, a little too warmly. "What brings you to my side of town? We need to talk." Now, my voice was low, but I was done playing games. He laughed, crossing his arms. "Oh, so it's serious then? Fine. Let's talk." I motioned for him to follow me to a nearby alley, away from prying eyes and cameras. As we stood there, I could feel the rage boiling up, every ounce of control stretched thin. But I knew I had to keep calm, to show him that I wasn't scared. "You need to stop, Liam," I said firmly. "The letters, the stalking, the obsession with Emily, it ends now." He raised an eyebrow, his expression amused. "Or what? Are you going to go to the police again? You're wasting your time. They can't do anything." "Maybe not yet," I admitted, stepping closer, lowering my voice. "But I will find a way to make sure they can. You're nothing but a thief and a fraud, and everyone will see that soon enough." Liam's smirk faltered, just slightly before he straightened, his gaze turning cold. "You're so desperate to cling to what you have, aren't you? But the thing is, Mike, you don't deserve it. You never did. You took everything for granted, while I was left with nothing. All I'm doing is balancing the scales. You had every chance to build your own life, I shot back, barely able to keep my voice steady. Instead, you threw it away. That's on you, Laum, not me. He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Spare me the lecture. The truth is, you've always been too weak to see the bigger picture. People want someone who can offer them more, someone who understands what they truly need. And soon, Emily will see that too. Something inside me snapped. She'll never choose you. Whatever you think you're doing, it's a lie, Liam. And she sees right through it. For the first time, I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, his cool demeanor cracking. You think you know her so well? You think she doesn't have doubts? I've seen the way she looks at you. She's questioning everything. She's questioning because you're manipulating her. I said, taking a step forward. You're a coward, hiding behind a fake name, playing mind games. But it won't work. I won't let you destroy my life. Liam took a deep breath, regaining his composure. You can't stop me, Mike. I'm already here, and I'm not going anywhere. She deserves better, and I'll be there to show her exactly what that looks like. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, rage coursing through me. I'd come here to end things, to force him to back down, but I'd only fueled his resolve. Lion was more dangerous than ever, and I knew now that words alone wouldn't stop him. That night, I sat down with Emily, telling her everything Lion had said. She listened in stunned silence, her expression growing more horrified with each word. So he's actually trying to convince me that you're not who I think you are? She asked, her voice shaking. I nodded. He thinks he can win you over by making you question everything. He's playing mind games, Emily, hoping that you'll doubt me enough to let him in. She took a deep breath, her hand resting on mine. I'm so sorry, Mike. I can't believe it's come to this. But I want you to know, none of this changes how I feel about you. He can't come between us. Her words brought a wave of relief, but I knew the fight wasn't over. We sat together, discussing our next steps, deciding that we'd go to the police again, this time with Jason's statement and the recordings I'd managed to capture. If the law couldn't stop him directly, then we'd find another way to expose him, to cut off his access to our lives. In the meantime, we agreed to tighten our security, changing locks, setting up cameras, even informing neighbors to keep an eye out for Ethan. Every small action gave us a bit more control, a bit more protection. But as the days went by, I could feel Liam lurking, watching, waiting. I knew he was calculating his next move, that he was too invested to simply let go. He wanted my life, my happiness, and he was willing to go to any lengths to claim it. But I wasn't the same person he'd manipulated in the past. I was ready to fight for what mattered most, no matter how dark things got. And as I looked over at Emily, her hand gripping mine, I knew I had everything I needed to win. In the weeks that followed, Liam's presence lurked around every corner of my life. Emily and I had upped our security, informed our friends, and even filed a restraining order, although it only added a slim layer of protection, as Liam's alternate identity technically made him a ghost. Still, it was a small barrier that helped me sleep at night, knowing I'd done everything I could to keep him away. But then, one day, I came home to find Emily sitting on the couch, her face pale as she held a document in her hands. Mike, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I got this today. She handed me the letter, her hand trembling. It was a court notice, a petition for an annulment of our marriage, filed under her name but clearly not written by her. The listed petitioner was Ethan Hayes, Liam's fake identity, claiming that our marriage was fraudulent and that Emily had been manipulated into it. Liam was attempting to destroy us legally, using every twisted tactic he could muster. A chilling rage settled over me. This was no longer just harassment. This was a deliberate attempt to dismantle my life from within, using every legal loophole he could find to tear my marriage apart and ruin my credibility. He was relentless, pushing me to the brink, hoping I'd snap under the weight of it all. Emily gripped my arm, her eyes filled with anger and fear. Mike, I'm not going to let him do this. I'll fight it. I'll make it clear to the court that this is a lie. I took her hand, feeling the determination in her grip. He's trying to get us to break, Em. He thinks he can wear us down until we give in, but we're stronger than that. Over the next few days, we met with an attorney to challenge Liam's claims, filing a counter petition that highlighted his history of fraud, manipulation, and identity theft. Every word of the statement felt surreal, as if I were describing a plot from a crime novel rather than the life I was living. But as I watched Emily recount Liam's bizarre tactics to the lawyer, I felt renewed resolve. We were a team, and Liam had severely underestimated the strength of our bond. But things escalated yet again when Liam made a bold move that shattered the thin veneer of normalcy we were holding on to. One night, as Emily and I returned from a dinner out, we found our front door slightly ajar, the lock tampered with. I felt my heart drop as we stepped inside, calling out, but there was no answer. The house was untouched. Almost. In our bedroom, Liam had left a small, neatly placed photo on the bed. It was a picture of Emily and me on our wedding day, with Liam's face pasted crudely over mine, as if he were part of that moment instead of me. Underneath, he'd scrawled a message in thick black marker. "Soon, this will all be mine." Emily gasped, covering her mouth as I picked up the photo, my hands shaking with anger. The audacity, the sheer boldness of him breaking into our home, leaving a threat so blatant, went beyond anything I'd expected. I called the police immediately, handing them the photo, finally able to show them just how dangerous and unhinged Liam had become. When Detective Connolly arrived, she took one look at the photo and shook her head grimly. "This is more than just harassment. We're moving forward with criminal charges. He's escalating, and it's only a matter of time before he tries something even more drastic." For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. With the police on board and the evidence stacking up, Liam's grip on our lives was slipping. But I knew better than to celebrate just yet. He was too determined, too invested in this twisted game to walk away without a fight. We installed additional security cameras, hired a private investigator to track his movements, and made sure to document every interaction, every strange letter or call. The legal proceedings dragged on, with Liam showing up to court under his alias, brazenly defending his fabricated claims. He played his part well, using his fabricated identity to paint a story of betrayal and manipulation, while Emily and I fought to keep our lives intact. Finally, after weeks of back and forth and countless sleepless nights, we received a break. The private investigator had tracked Liam's financials, discovering a hidden account linked to his real name. The account was filled with fraudulent transfers, money siphoned from my savings years ago, enough to connect him directly to the theft and prove he'd been lying about his identity. Armed with this new evidence, Detective Connolly led a raid on Liam's apartment. Emily and I waited anxiously for news, our hearts racing with a mix of dread and relief. When Connolly finally called, her voice steady and reassuring, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. "We have him, Mike," she said. "He's in custody, and with the charges we're pressing, it's unlikely he'll be able to post bail." His lies caught up with him. Emily and I held each other, a wave of relief washing over us. After everything Liam had put us through, after the relentless manipulation, the lies, and the threats, he was finally where he belonged. And as I sat there, holding Emily, I realized that I hadn't just won back my life. I'd reclaimed my peace, my trust, and the love we'd worked so hard to protect. The weeks that followed were spent picking up the pieces. We fortified our home, reconnected with friends we distanced ourselves from out of fear, and allowed ourselves to finally breathe. It wasn't easy to let go of the trauma Liam had inflicted, and there were still times when I'd catch Emily glancing at the door, half expecting another letter or a shadow lurking outside. But as time went on, the memories of his threats grew dimmer, replaced by the steady, comforting routine of our life together. We celebrated every small victory: an evening out without worry, a peaceful night's sleep, a laugh shared without the fear of someone trying to tear us apart. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, Emily took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "We made it," she said softly, a smile in her eyes. I squeezed her hand, feeling the strength of everything we'd built, everything we'd overcome. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "We made it together." And as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, I realized that no matter what Liam had tried to steal from me, he'd never touched the one thing that truly mattered: the unwavering bond between us.